everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're really excited to be here to talk a little bit more about our Smart Cities and Mobility Innovations Call for Applications, which is a part of our Sustainable Communities program. We can just go ahead and take it from there. So let's see here. All right, just a little bit of logistical details on using Zoom as an FYI. Please take care to make sure that you're muted when you're not speaking. If you're using the phone to mute and unmute yourself, you can press *6. Similarly, if you need to ask any questions, you have a couple of options. You can use the raise hand feature when clicking on the participants at the bottom of your screen. You can press *9 when you're using the phone. You can type your question into the chat box, another option there, or if preferred, you can just simply save your questions for the end. We did reserve the last 30 minutes just for a Q&A, so that is another option as well. And just lastly, FYI, the link to all of today's slides and information will also be emailed to everyone who registered today to participate in the meeting. So you will have that as well as this recording afterwards, and all of that stuff will also be posted online. So you've got lots of opportunities to watch and read later. So a little bit on our agenda today. I did just want to show that, we will be talking about a lot of exciting things. First, we're going to do a sustainable community program and a Smart Cities and Mobility Innovations call for projects, just general overview for both the program and the call. And then we will really be diving into the details on all 4 of our different project types, looking at curb space data collection and inventory, technology assessment, parking management, and permitting process. And we have a variety of guest speakers and even SCAG speakers today too. So we should be talking about a lot of exciting things there. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we will have the 30 minutes set aside for the Q&A portion towards the end. So let's get started. I will talk a little bit about an overview as I described before. So to get started, a little background on the Sustainable Communities program. This has been around in at least one form or another for the better part of 2 decades. So it's likely that you've heard of it. And it's really one of our best tools for implementation because it lets us directly partner with member agencies and then provide technical assistance. And that ultimately supports all of our goals and strategies that are outlined in Connect SoCal, our most recent regional transportation plan or sustainable community strategy, our RTP SCS document. And really of utmost importance this year is making sure that these projects meet the needs of our communities while also addressing recovery and resiliency as well. This year, there are multiple calls for applications, and each call is focused on a specific regional goal. And our 3rd call is all about smart cities and mobility innovations. So a little background on the SCP program-wide goals, our Sustainable Communities program. When we think about the overall SCP and not just the Smart Cities and Mobility Innovations call for applications, our goal is really to provide planning resources for active transportation, multimodal planning efforts, sustainability, land use, and affordable housing. And we also need to ensure that we're actively addressing health, equity, and racial injustice in all of our regional planning efforts. And lastly, we have to continue our work to make sure that we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled so we can help meet our regional and our state goals as far as air quality goes. So those are all really important goals of the Sustainable Communities program. Now, some specifics on the program's alignment with Connect SoCal. This program will support our key connections outlined in Connect SoCal. And these key connections are really like overlapping strategy areas. They're focused on topics like shared mobility and mobility as a service, smart cities and job centers, accelerated electrification, GO zones, and housing supportive infrastructure. And these key connections are really important for us to support a resilient region, and that's one that embraces regional strategies that help address community prosperity as well. And also important to consider is making sure that the region can compete for and secure federal and state funds. So when we think about the California Active Transportation Program and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Funds, we want to make sure that the region is eligible to go after those funds and can be awarded them as well. Now, out of those 5 key connections that we discussed, 3 of them are our focus for the Smart Cities and Mobility Innovations call for applications. The first is smart cities and job centers. It's probably a given because smart cities is in the name of the call after all. But we also are looking at go zones, which are really like multimodal hubs. The idea is that they allow people to make multiple modal options and choices when they're in one place. So the idea is that could be like a strategic intersection, something like that. So looking at go zones as well. And then shared mobility and mobility as a service. Again, probably another given since mobility is in the title of our call as well. But there's a number of strategies recommended in Connect SoCal that really target these topic areas and can improve mobility, which is the goal of this call. And in improving mobility, we can then expand our mobility ecosystems and our management strategies. And lastly, just another important note is that SCAG is intending to direct funding towards projects that use technology and innovation to implement these curb space management measures, which are then tied to those three key connections. So that technology and innovation component is really critical as we tie all of these things together. So why curb space management? Why is that the focus of this third call? Well, we know that cities have been struggling with a variety of issues related to curb space. And we know that that involves all sorts of things, ranging from on and off street parking, congestion, first and last mile connections, among others. And curb space demand has really increased with all of the new technologies that are out there, and it's only increased in demand even more so during the pandemic as we've had to change how we order, purchase, and deliver our goods and services. So curb space is in really high demand right now. And the reliable assessment of those curb spaces is often the best way to understand these issues and deploy potential solutions. So SCAG staff has developed 4 project types that all address curb space. And the goal is to really develop best practices that support mobility, enhance public spaces, and support the local economy, which is a really important consideration when we're thinking about an inclusive economic recovery. We have to remember that a lot of local vendors, merchants, and business owners are all relying on the curb as well. So each of the 4 project types does consider equity, which is really critical because we know that access to curb space is not always equitable. And there are a number of planning strategies that help us address things like this, such as optimizing curb space and its management, or enhancing transit and bike networks at the curb, or working with micromobility and transportation network companies, or TNCs, like Uber and Lyft, to better regulate our curb space activity. So some details on the 4 project types that are included in our call are, number 1, we're looking at curb space data collection and inventory, which focuses on expanding or updating the curb space data inventories through innovative data collection methods. Our second is technology assessment or adoption plan, which includes technology frameworks and demonstrations related to curb space management, curb regulating, on-street and off-street parking management, last mile delivery solutions, and other curb and mobility challenges. Our third category is parking management plans, which focus on advancing parking management in either a selected site or multiple sites within a city. Projects can include pilots, studies, or plans that can all potentially help us achieve a balanced transportation system through parking management. And lastly, permitting process evaluation, which looks at evaluating existing or developing new permitted uses for curb space, which improves safety and accessibility for all users. And this really focuses on permitting processes in business districts, commercial areas, and in schools. So now that you've got a little bit of an understanding about the project types, there's several different project examples and best practices found in our region and outside of our region. And we wanted to really compile these as resources, so they're all online at the website. If you haven't been to the website, please check it out. You can Google SCAG SCP for Sustainable Communities Program, and it will take you there. So you can see all of the information that we've compiled, not just for this call, but for the previous calls as well. And that's all up there, including some of these project examples. And there's really a ton of other useful resources on the website, so definitely check that out if you haven't yet. Now, for some of the project examples, for instance, for curb space inventory project types, we look to our neighbors to the north up in San Francisco area at their at the San Francisco Municipal Transit Agency curb and their curb management strategy, I should say. As for technology assessment project types, we see a lot of these technology action plans these days. LADOT had recently put one out, and that's an excellent example as well. It is worth noting that we do want to see anything that's related to technology, though. We do really want to tie it back to the curb. We want to make sure that we're tying these mobility concepts back to curb space management. As for parking management plans, there's a number of them in our region that are examples. They've been done in places like Balboa Village and City of Garden Grove, so those examples are up there as well. And then lastly, for permitting type projects, the work underway in Santa Monica is a really great example that we included on the website. And we're really excited to say that we have Santa Monica here to talk about this project. So that'll be really fun for us to hear about in just a little bit. But enough on these project types. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about them because we're going to go into great detail further on in the webinar. So onto some logistical details, just as an FYI. Eligible applicants will include local or regional transit agencies, local or regional agencies, but then also transit agencies, also natural resources or public land agencies, and lastly, tribal governments. We certainly welcome partnerships that encourage a mix of these different types of applicants, but we just want to make sure that the prime applicant that submits the application is some agency that has some sort of authority over curb space or public right-of-way. And then just as an FYI, applicants will be required to provide letters of support or intent with stakeholders, local groups, or CBOs, which is just another way that we're really working to strengthen our local projects and our local partnerships and making sure that we're increasing representation and engagement in these projects. So a little bit of detail about the online application submission process. It's entirely online. It's a fillable form. It should take about 45 to 60 minutes to complete. You'll probably spend another several hours, though, outside of that window compiling information because there's a lot of written responses, supporting documentation, and other types of background information that are requested throughout the application. Now, as for application materials, just as another FYI, all of the applications are going to want to include existing plan or policy documents, letters of support. We do ask for a map showing disadvantaged community areas as well. And then we also left it open that, if there's any other additional supporting documentation that you have that you would like to include, you have that option. And then lastly, we also have scoring rubrics for the all 4 different project types have scoring rubrics. And that will allow you to see exactly how each question is reviewed, evaluated, and scored. So speaking of those application scoring criteria, we really have 3 focus areas in general for each application. This is consistent across all 4 of the project types. The first focus area is really based on project need. We want to see mobility need, sustainable community strategy or SCS implementation need, and disadvantaged community needs. So we're really thinking about demonstrating our need here. Focus area 2 is based on the scope of work and project outcomes. So this section is really examining the details of the proposed project area, evaluating implementation goals, use of innovative technologies or policies, and the overall project benefits. And then lastly, focus area 3 is dedicated to partnerships and engagement, where we really want to ensure that applications are considerate of stakeholder engagement, and particularly ensuring that that engagement is equitable, diverse, and community driven. And then lastly, as far as the schedule goes, the call for applications is officially open, and it's open for about another month and a half, so you've got some time still. We'll hold a number of outreach events and opportunities to connect with potential applicants, which does include another upcoming application workshop for April 5th. We do have opportunities for one-on-one coaching sessions with SCAG staff, something that you can easily sign up for at the website. And then the deadline for applications is going to be April 23rd. And we actually plan to announce project awards in July later this year. And then we have 2 years to complete the work. Everything has to be done by June 30th, 2023. So that's the overall timeline for, not just the application, but also for the grant itself. We will have 2 years after the award to really get the project done. And then lastly, just a quick shout out again to our online resources. We have all sorts of things on the website. We've got our fact sheet up there. We've got a toolkit that helps you assemble your application, gives you some more info on the project types. And we have those coaching sessions that you can sign up for that, are essentially one-to-one, but you can invite everyone from your project team if you'd like. And they're to serve as office hours with SCAG staff. So if you have ideas or questions, always feel free to reach out, schedule one of those coaching sessions, and we're happy to help answer your questions. So that is it for my overview, and we will actually now launch a couple of poll questions for you, the attendees, before we really kick off the rest of the content here today. So I will turn it over to our AV staff to actually get those poll questions up, and I will stop sharing right now. All right, so we see our first poll question. We're curious what project type you're most interested in. We've got these 4 options. And we're really curious to see what everyone's interested in. We'll give everyone about 30 seconds. We know that there's some overlap in these topic areas too, so it's perfectly fine if your answer right now is not sure. Maybe that's why you're here today, to find out which of these topic areas is the most appropriate one for you to apply to. And there's nothing wrong with that either. So we're just kind of curious to hear what your thoughts are. We'll give it another 10 or 15 seconds. All right, looks like we've got just about everybody's responses here. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. All right, so we can see that curb space data collection and inventory is our most popular, but it's not that far ahead of a lot of the other categories. Technology assessments also right up there with 35%, parking management not far behind with 33%, and then permitting 18% and not sure 15%. So for those of you not sure, thank you for attending today. We hope that we can add some clarity here in the process during the webinar. And let's go to our second polling question then. Oh, it looks like we're looking at the first project type again. Sorry, give us just 1 second. There we go. Okay, so our second polling question is to ask, does your agency have any recently adopted plans or policies related to these topics? And when we say recently adopted, we really mean just any time in the last 5 years. So another thing that we're curious about is how much of this work has already been done in the region, how much of it's already been done by the folks that are interested in applying, and has there been a lot of work in any of these areas? So curious to hear your thoughts. We'll give you another 15 or 20 seconds to fill that out too. All right, looks like we've got just about everybody's responses, so we can go ahead and close that poll as well. And it looks like almost 50% of us said we don't have any plans or policies related to any of these topic areas. So that's kind of good to hear that, this is at least a need for a lot of folks on the line here. We do see that some have done parking and technology work. Permitting and curb are a little less popular, but anyways, this is helpful information for us to gather. So thank you for sharing with us. I will go ahead then and get my screen share back up so we can dive right into our content. All right. So next, what we'll be talking about are the project types for the SCMI call and all of the examples that we've compiled today to talk about. And I will be turning it over to my colleague, Scott, to talk about curb space data collection and inventory.
Okay, thank you very much, Marissa, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Looks like we got a really good turnout, so really appreciate the time for everyone. Could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so I think I'll just kind of walk through the slide points, and then I'll try to add a little more context to give everyone maybe a better sense about expectations, opportunity, those sort of things. So for curb space data collection and inventory, we're looking to aim advanced plan studies activities. I think that that's going to be a consistent theme throughout this call here. For cities across the region through the curb related data inventory process. So I think for this point here, data collection, I see it looks like the polling there was a lot of interest in there. And then on the other polling, second question looked like there was minimal kind of exposure or work efforts towards it at this point from the group we have in the call here. So I think one of the key important things of data collection and inventorying the curb space environment that we can think about is obviously as we look to advance plan studies activities, all these things that we're talking about here collectively, we consider this, kind of a very fundamental element. It's really important to baseline or inventory, the curb space environment as it sets kind of the stage for understanding, all the different attributes, all the different characteristics, the variables, the things that are going on at the curb. And as the curb has become a lot more of a focal point with recent, there's a lot of drivers going on, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's, the impacts of everything that happened from last year during the pandemic, prior to the pandemic, transportation network companies, all these new things that are going on. It's just, creating more and more focus, more confluence, more passengers, movement of goods, everything kind of at the curb, that last kind of area where all these things kind of converge. So when it comes from a data collection and inventory standpoint, it's really important to, establish the framework, the baseline, all these key characteristics where we can really build on getting towards planning, studies, testing, piloting, all these sort of concepts. So really, we kind of look at this as a fundamental element of that process. And then some of the example projects that we've included, Marissa mentioned the San Francisco project up front. We also included the Seattle Department of Transportation Flex Zones, as well as a pilot program of Bellevue, Boston, and Minneapolis. So again, I think the key theme here is really, trying to create the data framework, understanding, each city, each region, there's a lot of different attributes and services and things that are just kind of going on in all those areas. So really looking for, examples and ways to be flexible, to consider things that can be tailored of specific interest. So in some areas, there may be more of a focus on the commercial side, depending on issues or operating aspects. And then, in other cities, there may be more focus on looking at some of the passenger related elements, looking at phasing items, with what's kind of recently occurred with the pandemic and how responses have occurred, and using curb space to deal with that situation as things continue to transition over time. How do we begin to think about making further adjustments as they make sense, those sort of things. And then as far as additional considerations, obviously understanding data action plan is crucial as part of a data collection and inventory effort, in setting kind of as part of the framework and setting expectations, how the data will be utilized, and trying to ensure that those expectations are met and the goals and objectives are achieved. And additionally, under this area, we've also included some eligible projects, which are included and not limited to the following. So complete inventory of the curb space, parking inventory, looking at areas within business districts, on-street, off-street parking, et cetera, as well as real-time monitoring. So again, trying to get at what I was mentioning earlier, when we think of inventory data collection, there's a lot of different characteristics that are included for each kind of unique aspect within a specific jurisdiction. So we want to make sure that there's an opportunity to get at all those different attributes in setting the data plan and those expectations and the goals and objectives, and how we can move forward towards other analysis, studies, pilots, demonstrations, all these things that are going to be fundamental in understanding what the base case is, and how we can begin looking at different scenarios, alternatives, et cetera. So I think with that, we can go ahead and move to the next slide. So what we wanted to do here is we just, SCAG had recently completed its last mile freight delivery study. So we thought it would be helpful to kind of expand upon the curb space data collection and inventory category here, by just walking you through, handful of slides or so to get a sense of how SCAG has taken an approach at looking at some of these specific things we're talking about here. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So for the study goals, again, so for SCAG, this was kind of its initial attempt at looking at curb space activity. And as part of this, it was done out of the Goods Movement and Transportation Finance Department. So the focus was right at the get-go, really looking at goods movement and freight and last mile delivery relationships. So the goals, were framed to, create transparency of the last mile delivery conditions as it relates to complete streets. Obviously, we wanted to understand challenges and needs from a variety of users and quantify, specific to delivery, the issues and conditions, look at balancing conflicting demands for street space, and developing strategies appropriate for different areas and identifying pilot projects for delivery improvements and using a stakeholder-driven process to accomplish this. So for this study, there's a couple things I think that are important. Due to the resources, the study, obviously, we're focused on the region. It was limited to focusing on the the city of Los Angeles. And as such, the study really, to get at more of a regional perspective, it was important to not just focus on one, or two areas within the city, but also to kind of look at all the different land use, street typology characteristics, et cetera, to lend the study to being able to have, some strategies that could be then, more parallel in other, less dense areas versus more dense areas, et cetera. And then the other important aspect of the study is, again, it was focused on last mile freight delivery, but at the same time, very quickly in doing the analysis of curb areas, it was very clear of the multi-passenger and commercial use of the curb. So the data collection effort was also expanded to include transit, personal vehicle, transportation network company, et cetera. So early on, it was clear that there was an opportunity here to really look more at a multimodal perspective of curb activity from a data collection perspective. So the study did actually collect pretty much all pieces of information that it could at each location. Next slide, please. So as far as the elements, again, it was the focus on the city of Los Angeles. So there was a citywide data analysis, as I mentioned, field data collection, stakeholder input, and a final report, including a toolbox of strategies. So the citywide data analysis was important in that there was an opportunity to try to get at some of this baseline information that I was referring to earlier through understanding land use characteristics, delivery demand characteristics, things such as parking violations, et cetera. So there was a very important role in working with the agencies as part of that process. So obviously the Los Angeles Department of Transportation, the City Planning Department as well, in really understanding data sources and inputs that we could really feed into the study. So I think that's a very important point when we think about this opportunity here. Different cities obviously have a variety of data and information that will be very valuable in feeding into the process. Next slide, please. So this slide here is just showing the high-level results of the data that was collected. And I think what's important in pointing out here is that there were a couple methods used to collect the data. There was 24/7 cameras that were mounted in different positions within the block to collect data nonstop. And there were also field technicians relied upon on each block at different points of each block to also collect data as well. So that's one of the kind of lessons learned out of this study is from the camera collection avenue, just using kind of your typical regular camera, just collecting information timestamp by and then taking that data, translating it into a database. There were a lot of challenges with site visibility especially depending on some of the blocks, the length of a block, some of the longer blocks in some of the commercial areas or downtown areas, visibility tended to be an issue, and it wasn't able to have the granularity of the technician collection efforts. At the same time, it's very important to make sure that all the attributes can be transferred from, whether it's from a camera or a technician filling something out, to make sure that the data is very accurate and precise. So there's also, a level of effort in making sure that the technicians are capable of having the expertise to focus in an area like freight, where there's a lot of different characteristics of companies, vehicle types, et cetera, to really populate a database to help understand what's really occurring by different use types at the curb. So, just a couple of challenges to be aware of. So ultimately, this slide is showing by type TNCs like Uber and Lyft, taxis and shuttles, buses, personal vehicles, and the total. And to the right of the data table, it's showing the type of curb areas used for passenger loading. So if we can see here, I think for the TNCs, it's first and foremost, 10% of all passenger loading were done by a TNC for the areas of data collection. And if we were to eliminate buses and look at more of a personal vehicle, shuttle, taxi, and TNC relationship, the TNC penetration was closer to 20%. So it's giving us some perspective right off the bat on that dynamic, which we were very interested in, obviously, at the time, as TNC growth had been growing very robustly through the last few years. And the other thing that's very interesting is the curb type. We were able to see that 73% of those passenger loadings for TNCs were occurring in red delineated areas. So again, this gives us an understanding of how the curb spaces are being utilized. So actually buses are, doing that, but there's a bus stop location there. So TNCs were actually behaving more like transit services than other vehicles based on the, regulatory environment of curb space. Next slide, please. So this slide is just meant to give you guys an idea of some of the database elements. So to the left, we're showing a 7th and Hill Street, just how the curb is broken down. So again, accounting for all the different space relationships, whether it's red zones, loading zones, metered parking, driveways, crosswalks, et cetera, non-metered parking, pretty much every use of the curb just broken down into its own unique space. And that curb space inventory basically translates into the utilization, where we are identifying the elements being collected by camera or by technician. So we're specifying the location of the curb space where the activity is occurring, vehicle types, what the actual activity is, among many other attributes. Next slide, please. And again, this is just an example to demonstrate camera collection. To the right, just giving you some ideas of visibility. As you can see, as you get further down the block, visibility becomes a lot more challenging, depending on whether there's a lot of vehicles parked in the area, and how you can identify different vehicles. It can be difficult to say, what was that, a TNC or just a personal vehicle dropping someone off, et cetera, those sort of things. And then the table here is just meant to, again, show, at the granular level, how we can really look at the data, looking at the duration of time spent in the curb, as well as the different vehicle types, what they were doing. It's a delivery vehicle, it's just a parked vehicle, et cetera. Correlating, again, metered, non-metered parking, those relationships of dwell time, duration time. And then, really understanding, at a more block specific level, what's occurring. Next slide, please. This slide here is, again, I just want to emphasize one of the key metrics is duration. So this slide is just giving the high level, the comprehensive data set of all the information collected, broken down by whether it's a parked vehicle, a passenger vehicle, or a delivery vehicle, the different curb types all throughout the study areas, and just, giving us the actual duration of those different actions and curb types across the study. So again, I think, we can see, average delivery time, we can see average park time, average passenger time, and accordingly, look at the different use types, et cetera, and see regulatory issues potentially, in red curb spaces, look at the parking areas of average time based on, metered or free or all those sort of things. So we can really make those relationships of, how space is being utilized and get a better understanding of those different trends and dynamics. Next slide, please. So here, this is, again, a similar table to the other one. It's focused specifically on delivery vehicles. So as everyone could maybe be guessing, a substantial majority of all the deliveries were made by package type parcel delivery vehicles. And of those, the substantial majority was typically what, the companies we see, your FedEx, UPS, US Postal Service, et cetera. One thing that we found interesting was as high as 25% of personal vehicles were actually making deliveries. So, again, we didn't have more granularity on that, but these could be kind of like contracted services from different companies. I think we've seen that expand a lot more frequently over the past year. But again, this was something that was still occurring in the earlier time before the pandemic. So again, this is just to try to illustrate, breaking things down at a more granular level and trying to make the same relationships with curb areas. So again, we could look at, the majority of space being used in yellow, but then at the same time, a high proximity of red space types. And, we did interviews and a lot of discussions with some of these companies. And, there's a lot of reasons and things that we can deconstruct on why they're doing that, or what's really driving those sort of things. We recognize time efficiency is very important. So for them, in a lot of ways, it may make sense to take the risk of using a red zone to do a quick delivery versus taking more time to circle around and find a space, especially if there's already a vehicle in the yellow space, et cetera. Next slide, please. I believe this is repetitive. Sorry for that. You can go to the next slide, please. So again, here, we just wanted to give a sense of some of the data that we collected on the aggregate. So looking at the blue shaded areas of delivery is one thing we noted, which again, this isn't surprising, but that, the majorities of deliveries were occurring during business times of operations. So, but when we start overlaying other things, looking at kind of like, peak times of travel, of work, commutes, et cetera, the picture to the right, I mean, you can see that as deliveries are not, they're also kind of ramping up towards their peak volumes as well. So this gets at other issues such as congestion, and thinking about the confluence of all different types of modes, and what they're doing during times of day. So that was something interesting to highlight. And then looking at kind of like the other different types of trip classifications, whether it's family, personal, commute trips, social things, et cetera. Looking at the graphic to the left, we could also look at correlations related to delivery, again, trying to illustrate that while this study is focused on delivery, there are a lot of multimodal dynamics that could be considered. Is there one more slide, or was that the last slide? Okay. So I think to wrap up, just a couple of points to mention in addition to that. So, so this is focused on kind of like the data collection side and the inventory, and really trying to look at ways to analyze and assess the information. And I just want to reiterate that as part of the last mile freight study, we took that information and we tried, in order to take it to another level, to actually get towards implementation and to generate regional useful information. We developed a toolbox to really highlight all kinds of different opportunities in unison with the literature review across the country to kind of illustrate what are concepts, what are things that cities can be working towards or doing, once you've kind of started to collect data, distill information, and think about what the next steps are. So as part of that, we looked at, there's different options like, looking at how you can organize delivery zones, looking at how you can use facilities during times of day, curb space during the time of day, flexible angles, all those sort of things. And ultimately, the study really looked at trying to develop pilot project concepts that then, with opportunities to work with private and public stakeholders, could begin building a work plan and a framework to start testing and piloting some of these concepts to build from the initial data set to get more information and really more analysis and better understanding some of these opportunities of how to utilize curb space. So I think with that, I'll go ahead and stop there, and I can turn it over to Tom to talk in the next section, the technology assessment or adoption plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. So I'll talk a little bit about the technology assessment. You can go to the next slide. So the technology assessment section, those projects should focus on technology frameworks and demonstrations related to curb space management, curb regulating, on-street and off-street parking management, last mile delivery solution, and other curb and mobility challenges. So these projects should include curb space related technology programs that improve existing city conditions, and that can take a bunch of different forms. As long as it sort of meets those base qualifications, we want you to sort of think creatively and think about things that maybe haven't been done before, so that we can together sort of learn lessons and chart a course forward based on those lessons learned that we can share with the region and even share with other regions to create new best practices. Some examples might include the Minneapolis Mobility Hubs program, which is a program to get transportation to meet at these mobility hubs where you could find a range of different low emissions, sustainable transportation options at a specific place. So if you went to one of these mobility hubs, you would know that you could get a bus there, you could get a scooter there, you could get a bike there. Looking at ways to encourage proliferation of these hubs as well as getting people to use them. The LADOT Technology Action Plan and the Santa Clara County Transportation Technology Strategic Plan were sort of like all-encompassing assessments of the transportation technology that existed in those places at the time, and the sort of guiding principles that those agencies were using to work with new technology as it comes online. And the Seattle DOT Technology Plan, RFP, they were looking at technology as a way to look at transportation demand management. So how can technology help us reach our VMT reduction goals, our greenhouse gas reduction goals, et cetera. And the proposals should also include how the technology assessment will be utilized. So how will your agency or community be using the technology assessment going forward? Yeah, just want to reiterate that it would be great to see proposals that either your community hasn't done before, or that maybe no community has done in the way that you're proposing it. And so now I'll turn it over to Lacey to talk a little bit more in depth about one of the projects that they worked on in Santa Monica.
Great. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Kelly Ferguson. I'm with the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, and I'm going to speak a little bit today about our project with the city of Santa Monica, which is the nation's first zero emissions delivery zone. And a specific element of this project is focused on curb management. So I will do a brief overview of the project in general, and then present on some of the specifics relating to the curb management element. So some of the core goals relating to this project are really about how we can take a lot of the technological advancements that we've seen in recent years relating to last mile delivery and going zero emissions, be it battery electric vehicles or smaller form factors, and how we really help unlock that in a ecosystem approach, utilizing a zone and providing incentives to bring those technologies to the zone. And that's how we're one of the ways that we're using curb management. The zone in particular is about 1 square mile, and it encompasses 2 of the core commercial areas of Santa Monica, including the downtown area with 3rd Street Promenade, as well as Main Street, and then has a large portion of residential area as well in the southern end of the zone. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the goals that we want to accomplish with this project is providing a blueprint for other cities in order to adopt other zero emission zones and provide learnings for different stakeholders, be it the delivery companies participating in the pilot, and ultimately providing a lot of benefits to the community in the form of reduced air pollution, GHG emissions, noise, congestion, et cetera. And of course, in light of everything that's been going on with the pandemic over the last year, more and more there's been a focus on how we can really unlock some of the benefits of the zone and provide access to zero emissions delivery methods to local businesses. So those are all things that we're really looking at here. And we have a huge coalition of partners. It's growing regularly. And one of the main things to really focus on, I think, here is we have a very strong engagement from the local community. We have 5 formal partners from the local community outside of city staff. So I think I saw Francie was on the call earlier from Santa Monica. Obviously, she and her team are very engaged with us on the project and helping us deploy lots of the specific technological solutions and kind of understanding the direction that we want to go. But we have a lot of involvement from business improvement districts, neighborhood associations, and others that have been great sounding boards for some of the ideas and being able to communicate with us throughout the project. And then obviously we have a number of delivery partners that have committed to the project, and we are going to be onboarding several others as the project unfolds. So at a high level, there's a number of different types of technologies that we are deploying in the zone. Everything from small and medium duty electric vehicles with partners that have their own fleets, but then also we're providing things like the ability to rent these vehicles to do last mile delivery in the zone. We're also looking at smaller form factors. I think a lot of people have been hearing about e-cargo bikes and different pilots in major cities with Amazon, UPS, all of those parcel players. And so we're looking at doing those as well. And we're also looking at smaller form factors like bikes, scooters, and sidewalk delivery robots for food delivery. And then, of course, one of the key things that we're doing in the zero emission delivery zone is utilizing curb management. And so the approach that we're taking in Santa Monica is identifying about 20 curb spaces in which we are designating them as zero emissions delivery only. And those are basically incentives to participants to be able to encourage them to use zero emissions and have that faster and easier access to particular typically congested areas in the zone. And obviously, I think in the previous presentation, there was a big highlight on kind of the impacts that COVID and the pandemic have had on a lot of things, but in particular, I think we all know that delivery has just skyrocketed. So kind of the need for this and understanding the impact broadly on the system, but then also how can we make this a more efficient system and address some of the core problems that are just going to get more challenging as we see more and more people turn to delivery, whether that's congestion, noise, safety concerns, and pollution. So how can we incentivize more and more of these delivery companies to utilize smaller form factors, to utilize electrified mobility in all forms, all sizes, to help improve the lives of local residents? So we're still early in our project. We are in kind of the final stages of identifying the exact curb locations, but we'll be deploying the zero emission curb access areas in likely the next month. So we're excited to start collecting data, but some of the early lessons that we can share, particularly around curb selection, that could be useful for you all when you're looking at what you want to learn is, data for curbs can be really challenging to get. And I know that one of the things under this program is about collecting inventory. That is an incredibly valuable piece of information. We already had a little bit of that mapped out in some sections of Santa Monica, but just kind of knowing what you have available already is very powerful. But just generally, identifying where you want to target your study can be a really big challenge. And so some of the things that we tried to approach when we were looking at ideal curb locations, when we started out, we wanted the delivery companies to tell us where they wanted curbs, because we thought if they're the ones, if this is to incentivize them to be able to go zero emission delivery, and they want to find a way to have better access to the curb, then they should want to tell us where to put the curb. That's not the case, or at least that wasn't the case with us, but maybe other people will have better luck. But it can be really challenging to get that kind of data from a large corporation. They're not very forthcoming with data. So there can be other ways around it. And oftentimes there are things like studies from SCAG or Urban Freight Lab that may have some insights into, maybe not specific to your area, but there might be examples where there are data sets where you can identify where there are challenges in congestion, access to the curb. So that was one of the approaches that we tried to take that wasn't entirely successful, was going directly to delivery companies. But what we found was more successful was going directly to the community and asking them where they thought the best places would be for these curbs. We work directly with business improvement districts and business improvement areas to essentially walk areas of downtown and Main Street with us and tell us where they thought that these curbs would be best placed. And so we did a lot of on the ground observation, driving around the city and seeing how delivery vehicles were using curbs or not properly using curbs in most cases, and just kind of making notes of those things where we were observing, and then also getting input directly from the community that knows their streets the best. Another way that we looked at information was getting parking enforcement data. So you may be able to get different levels of data that show how often tickets are being flagged for certain parts of the area and what types of companies those are going to. That might be a good indicator where you might want to highlight a zero emission curb or some sort of curb relating to delivery. And again, looking at the lessons of what other people have done. There's a lot of great resources out there, including a lot from SCAG. For our pilot specifically, we have selected a video-based solution. There are a lot of different companies that are entering this space that are tracking this data in some way. A lot of them are mobile-based, but the company that we selected is called Automotive. They're a video analytics company. And so they provide basically a view of the curb and are able to scrub all of the kind of personally identifiable information and basically give us data on some of the core things that we care about. And so this is an example, not specifically from our pilot, but of the dashboard and kind of the information that we will be getting on a regular basis. And so it tells us things like the different types of vehicles or the types of participants that are in the view of the camera. And it can tell us things like dwell time at the curb or double parking or triple parking violations. And then ultimately, we're going to be using this to help us identify, to get to things like our key metrics in terms of if we're improving emissions, how well we're utilizing the curb, traffic flow, compliance issues, and safety. And then ultimately, another one is revenue potential. So we're not necessarily charging people for using the curb in the pilot, but there is the potential for that as a lesson learned down the line. And so some of the core things that we may be able to learn from this pilot, and I think some of these were highlighted in the last presentation, but how can we take the data from this pilot and learn about time of use and usage of the curb throughout the day, the week, and while there may be the opportunity to do so, I think seasonality would also be very interesting to see as well. Another thing that you can get from this type of pilot are, best locations for use type. So is that the best spot for delivery? Is it the best spot for ride hailing? Or other types of purposes. And so I'm kind of speaking a little bit more broadly than just about our pilot, but and then what is the potential of pricing the curb for revenue generation? So this is one that has been coming up regularly in the region about how to reduce congestion by pricing the curb in a way that that reduces congestion, and how can we maximize curb efficiency or incentivize certain behaviors, for example, using zero emissions vehicles. And so another thing that we at Lacey are looking at and are interested in learning from this pilot and in future pilots like this are how do we incentivize zero emission vehicle adoption for last mile delivery or other high vehicle miles traveled vehicles, such as ride hailing vehicles. And then I think we're going to switch gears a little bit and go into our zero emissions mobility and community pilots that Jesse on our team will present along with one of our community partners from Pacoima Beautiful to really explain a little bit about how we approach community engagement.
Thanks, Kelly. So considering that these are not necessarily technologically focused on curb and curb management tech, like Kelly said, I'm going to focus on community engagement. So some of the slides you might realize I move through a little bit quicker as they are less appropriate probably for this webinar. Next slide. Okay, so with the zero emission mobility and community pilots, Lacey launched these back in mid 2019 with a two-sided RFI. It was a call for tech providers to submit their transportation solutions, and at the same time for communities to submit their transportation needs. And when we define communities, it could have been a CBO, a resident, a city, all of the above. If you had, a transportation problem that you needed to be solved in a given geographic area, all we were asking for is that the area where the technology would be implemented would be in the top 10% of disadvantaged communities as defined by the Cal EnviroScreen 3.0. And so on the left-hand column, it shows like the whole pilot process we went through. And what we're highlighting on the right is that the communities were involved with us right from the start with the RFI and continue to be every step of the way. We went through a pretty lengthy process of interviews and physical on-site visits before selecting our ultimate 4 locations for the pilots to be launched. And then once those communities were selected, we went immediately into weekly meetings with our community partners so that they could be a part of and lead really the designing and scoping of the pilot projects themselves. Next slide. So we picked 4 communities: Pacoima, Leimert Park, San Pedro, and Long Beach. We have one other just to note. We had started working in Huntington Park, but because of COVID, we had to put that pilot on pause. We do have a grant proposal out in order to continue that work, but for now, these are the pilots where we have 3 active, and actually the one in Long Beach was already, the pilot term is ended. So in Pacoima, we have an EV car share. The tech provider is Lacey's startup company, Envoy. They're a turnkey EV car share service. Our CBO partner is Pacoima Beautiful. We actually have a rep from them today to talk more about the community outreach and engagement that they've been running for the pilot. So that'll be a really great treat to hear straight from Gabe. And we have 2 Nissan Leaf EVs for that pilot. One of them was provided by Lacey's transportation electrification partner member, Nissan, and they provided a long range Leaf. So there's a good comparison of a shorter range and then a long range battery. In Leimert Park, we have a neighborhood electric vehicle shuttle, courier and commuter e-bike rentals, and also a delivery partner with Shoebox. The tech providers are Circuit for the neighborhood electric vehicle shuttle. They are a Lacey startup company, and then Zumo is providing the courier and commuter e-bikes. We also have a group of 3 CBOs and 2 local businesses that we partnered with for the community outreach, again, design and scoping along every step of the way. And then in San Pedro, this is going to sound very similar to Pacoima because it's also an EV car share with Envoy, but our partner is the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles, and we are focused on the residents of the Rancho San Pedro property. So this pilot is actually closed to the residents only in Rancho San Pedro versus in Pacoima, it's open to the broader community. And then lastly, in Long Beach, we had e-cargo vehicles in partnership with the Conservation Corps of Long Beach in order to help them with their renovation and restoration projects along the lower Los Angeles River. And we were looking for an increased efficiency with their work there, and also engaging with the conservation crew members around clean tech and green career pathways. So next slide, that one will actually go straight into Long Beach. I'm gonna just cover this really quickly. The pilot term has ended as of December 2020. And this one, you know, again, we were working with the Conservation Corps and for their work, so we weren't doing broader community engagement. And the other component, I think, as we all know, is with COVID last year, it really disrupted the programs planned with the Conservation Corps. And so we didn't see as much utilization as we would have liked. We did see the crew members really engaged with the clean tech and interested actually in other Lacey programming where we have a fellowship and training where they can focus on mechanical and electrical maintenance for EVs and micromobility. So that was really exciting. And we did see increased efficiency in the programs that were still running during COVID. So we'll go ahead and move to the next slide. In Leimert Park for our multimodal pilot, like I said, we have actually quite a group of community partners. And besides like the learnings that I have mentioned here for all the technologies, I think one of the things that we have as a takeaway is that obviously the more partners you engage with, you add complication and coordination. That's understood. It's just going to take more time. But the other piece is, I would just say, if you're looking to have multiple different CBO partners and potentially local businesses, look at having separate agreements with each of them. Again, that might take extra time, but I think in the long run, it'll just streamline all the processes and how each organization is engaging with the pilot and what they're bringing to the success of it. And then, quick takeaways. We've had really good adoption with the neighborhood electric vehicle shuttle. Back in December, when the Safer at Home order hit, obviously a lot of things dropped as far as transportation, as they should. But since then, we've seen everything start to pick back up again, which is really nice to see. It's a validation of the technology and how we're supporting the residents. We've even had anecdotal commentary where someone said, hey, I used to pay $20 in ride hailing every day. Now I take the free circuit shuttle to the bus to work and my commute. And so, saving an extraordinary amount of money every week. With the Zumo e-bikes, as far as the tech learnings there, we had a lot of careers testing out the e-bikes, transitioning or transportation mode shift, as one would say, out of their vehicles into bikes. A great learning there is that there's still a lot of work to be done in educating people around not only how to ride on the streets, but encouraging them to increase their skills, because there's a lot going on in the streets in Los Angeles, and so a lot of people didn't feel necessarily safe because there's not always dedicated continuous bike lanes. And then lastly, with Shoebox, which is one of Lacey's startup companies, they're partnered with a local business, South LA Cafe in Leimert Park. And the pilot actually hasn't launched. They're still in their design and scoping phase, but we're looking at vehicle miles traveled reduction for the delivery across LA County, bringing South LA Cafe specialties, beyond their borders in South LA. Next slide. In San Pedro, this is the EV car share with HACLA. And so because we're focused on the residents of Rancho San Pedro, we're actually partnered with the HACLA community coaches. They're residents that are paid a monthly stipend by HACLA to be the go-to resource for all of the residents. And so through the pilot, we also provided them an additional stipend, and they became the community engagement and outreach for this pilot. And so there's 8 community coaches. It's been really exciting to see them learn about a new technology and then how to share it with their fellow residents and really become advocates for an EV car share, being able to explain the benefits of it and also what it means to have shared responsibility, because it's a new concept. But the cool thing is shared responsibility can be learned, where we saw, a few hiccups to start with continued, outreach from the community coaches. Like if a resident forgets to plug in the car, the community coaches chat with them and say, hey, if you don't plug in the car, the next person that rolls up for the reservation is not going to be ready for them. And so they really learned how they're supporting each other to get where they need to go, which was really cool to see. And again, anecdotally, one of the community coaches said that her daughter just got her driver's license, was thinking about purchasing a used vehicle, and she was able to convince her. She was like, why would you spend your money paying for the vehicle, not only the vehicle, the maintenance, insurance, etc., when you can just access this EV car share? So it was a pretty cool example of a new car purchase avoidance, which was one of our goals for the pilot. So now, bringing it back to community engagement, the community coaches have been absolutely vital. This program is one of the highest performing deployments for Envoy in the LA area. And it just really shows that with constant outreach and education, just having someone there that the residents can contact when they have a question, it really helps people feel comfortable adopting something that's new, and also they trust their resource. Let me see if I missed anything. Oh, I was just gonna, the other piece that we're still working on, other barriers, is just the residents learning how to access the mobile app. There's a lot of internet connectivity issues in the area. We're actually trying to fix those with a Wi-Fi extender so that people can access the app at the car and unlock the vehicle for the reservations. The app is also in English only currently. We'll be releasing a Spanish version in the future, but that can be tricky for those that don't speak English. And then, like I said, well, driver's license, not everyone has a valid driver's license. So whereas we thought that the payment method and people not having access to credit cards or bank accounts would be a bigger issue, that has been pretty straightforward with prepaid debit cards, but a lot of people without driver's license, of course, are not able to use the program. All right, next slide. And then lastly, in Pacoima, a lot of the same lessons learned transfers over. Like I said, this one, it's the EV car share is open to the entire community. So that really changes the dynamics, and Gabe can speak to that, because you don't have a very small targeted audience to complete your outreach to. And it makes things such as, like, one of the points here is that in-person training is really key. That's difficult to do in COVID, if not, obviously when the surge hit, that was not something that they were able to do or should do. And so you have to find different ways to do community engagement. Hopefully that changes. We're all looking forward to that day. But, again, when you're teaching about new technology, a lot of things that, if you're familiar with it, you might think that it is just common sense of how you drive an EV. It's a car, it's just like any other car. It's still, there's, small little nuances that you need to constantly remind people and share and help them become comfortable to adopt a new technology. I think I'm going to leave it there and ask Gabe to join me and kind of dig into the community engagement Pacoima Beautiful has been doing.
Hey, thanks, Jesse. Hi, so as she mentioned, at the beginning, we definitely had the support of our council district, Monica Rodriguez, which is at Council District 7. We also had the support of HACLA, right? Because the cars are actually located right next to the HACLA building in the San Fernando Gardens. Because of COVID, the office itself is closed now, so there haven't been much support. So it kind of was on us to go out and do more door knocking. We doubled down on social media. So it was a lot more of that and not so much help from HACLA. But because of COVID, we definitely, like as I said, we doubled our efforts in phone banking. We did door-to-door at the businesses that were around the area and all those apartments. And I believe it's around 500 apartments that we have done a handful of times, dropped off flyers. Social media has been really working for us as well. So, that's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We've also been using Nextdoor, which is an app that it's kind of like a bulletin board for your local community. You can only really sign up for one community and then you can post and everyone in that community can do the same thing, right? So it's information that only really benefits that community. So we've been posting on that as well. After the first lockdown, during that dip, when the numbers dropped, because Pacoima is actually so heavily impacted by COVID, it has some of the most numbers, right? We did have an event. It was a small event. It was a taco and ride event. So in that one, we had one of our staff members drive the car. We had, we took all the precautions to make sure everyone had their PPE, and they just kind of got in the back of the car, did a quick loop as the person informed them how easy it is to use. We had people, other staff members on the side, sending them up, showing them how to use the app And that actually went really well. We had incentives, of course, for them to join. We went live on Instagram. And since then, we haven't really had a chance to, because obviously in December, we had the second lockdown. But during that dip, it went a really good event for us. All of this actually, thanks to Lacey, we pretty much, they came up with the idea of a wellness campaign, which is what we're running at the moment, right? And the wellness campaign allows us to give riders and people who join the opportunity to rent the vehicles for 3 times for 2 hours at a time for free. And they can use it for anything medical. They can use it for, if they want to get the vaccine, if they just want to get a test, or any other just medical things. And because of this, we're actually in talks with the Northeast Valley Health Corporation on partnering up with them. I'm definitely dropping off flyers for them. And then hopefully we're trying to get a parking spot for the vehicles at their clinics, so that we're in talks with them about that. And that's something that we see as an absolute win for us. It's going to get the car to be used more often, and it's going to get the people in a community like ours that is really impacted by COVID the help they need, especially during this time when you can't use public transport as much, or people have the fear of using the public transport. And the other great thing is that honestly, all of this has really worked out for us because the community really does trust us. Anytime there's been any incidents with the vehicles, they're not charged, or if the tire pressure is low, anything, we have 2 or 3 members who actually constantly are calling us and letting us know that something is wrong, that it needs to be fixed, and we really appreciate that. Recently, we just had an active user sign up, and she's constantly actually texting me or calling me and letting me know that she's using the car, and she goes into detail and is like, hey, we're using it for this, I'm using it for this. And it's great. It's great to know that the people we're talking to, it's like they trust us. They want to talk to us, they want to use the car, and they're letting the people they know about the vehicles as well. And that's where we are. That's how we've been reaching the community and getting people to sign up.
Thanks, Gabe. And I think that was my last slide to present. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
I'm from SCAG, and I'm going to Marissa, can you put the slides back up? Thank you. So next slide, please. So parking management is a major need for cities, and strategies can potentially help regulate supply, reduce street congestion through pricing or proper allocation of parking, and encourage transit use. Applications for this project type will focus on advanced parking management in a selected site or multiple sites throughout a city or jurisdiction. Projects can include pilots and studies and plans that can help promote a balanced transportation system through parking management. And that's really the call is open to a wide range of parking management planning strategies to allow for flexibility to accommodate the diverse parking management needs throughout the SCAG region. Examples of eligible products include but are not limited to strategies that address the following. So parking management planning in a business district or other sub areas of a jurisdiction, on-street parking management or parking allocation, guidance, dynamic parking pricing strategies that serve to align demand and supply for parking, which can help maintain parking availability, reduce circling and related congestion. Also, planning for shared micromobility or car share parking. So, special
I'm sorry, Jamie, I think we're losing your audio a little bit.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. And also, so planning for, EV parking and, might need access to a charging facility might be a special case of parking management planning. And also planning for rideshare or retail food and drop off and pickup management at the curb. Unfortunately, we don't have a presenter today. I know we're a little behind, but I just want to walk through 2 examples from the SCAG region that demonstrate the range of parking management planning strategies that we will be supporting with this call. First, the City of Garden Grove Parking Management Strategic Plan. Just briefly to review the plan, this plan inventoried available parking options in the downtown area, recorded spot availability at different
Jamie, I think we're losing your audio again.
during the day. Hold on. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, one thing that could boost it, if you turn your video off, it'll give you more, but no.
Okay, let me try that. The Garden Grove Downtown Parking Management Plan also listed parking management strategies for the area, and ultimately summarized sort of the cost and time for implementation of each of the proposed strategies. Just some of the strategy listed, not all of them, included signage improvements, parking limits and restrictions, charging for parking that was currently free, encouraging alternate modes of transportation, and accommodating TNCs. The plan also evaluated funding options for implementing the parking management strategies that were outlined in the plan. Secondly, I want to also highlight LADOT's LA Express Park program, which is demand responsive parking pricing. This program sets pricing to achieve targeted parking availability from between 10 to 30%. LADOT uses information provided by in-ground vehicle detection sensors, rate, time limit, operating hour information, and also from analyzes information from the parking meters to analyze demand for parking and adjust rates as appropriate. So rates are not uniform; they respond to the demand at a given time or a given location, and they vary across the system. So based on the usage data, the rates are periodically readjusted to maintain the target availability. This program is currently running in 4 sub-areas of the city: downtown LA, Hollywood, Westwood, and Venice. Part of this program is providing real-time parking guidance, indicating available spaces and helping direct people to often underused garage parking. This type of guidance is available through mobile applications and also on physical dynamic signage. And also through mobile, payments can be made in multiple ways, including cash, credit and debit payments through machines that are located on the block for paying by space, or through mobile apps that work in conjunction with the program. So more info can be found on these and other best practices in the application materials. But I just want to again stress, that we want to support innovative programs, but that a wide range of parking management plans and strategies are eligible under this category, so it can be flexible in meeting the needs of local jurisdictions throughout the region. Thank you very much.
So the last project type in this call is permitted process evaluation. Next slide, please. So this project type looks at permitting process evaluation, impact of curb use to enhance safety and efficiency for all users, which includes seniors, people with disabilities, transit users, active transportation users. The applications need to focus on strategies to support these users, which also can include business users, business owners, schools, residents, etc. And as well as address last mile delivery related challenges, food delivery, ride share, drop off, pickup, school loading zones, outdoor dining, or parking. A few additional considerations can be noting community participation, engagement in the application, and leveraging existing or new partnerships for planning and implementation. Currently on the slide, I've included 2 examples from the region. One is City of Newport Beach's parking program, and second one is sidewalk vending program in the City of Santa Monica. Next slide, please. To further understand the project type, we have guest speaker to discuss the sidewalk vending program. We have here Anuj Gupta. He's the Deputy City Manager and Director of Policy for the City of Santa Monica. Over to you, Anuj.
Thank you very much, Prithvi. Just bear with me one moment while I share my screen. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Wonderful. I know we're a little bit behind, so I'll skip the intro. You heard about me and my role. So I wanted to delve into our sidewalk vending permitting program and policy in Santa Monica, which we put into place in 2019 and have been continuing to work on over the last couple of years. There is a long history of sidewalk vending in Santa Monica, particularly concentrated around our pier and beach area and the city's downtown. Historically, it had not been legally permitted in most of the city, though there were officially licensed vending carts on the pier and the 3rd Street Promenade, and a high volume of unpermitted vending activity on and around the pier. And the vending activity has periodically generated public safety and public health concerns, in addition to being a source of concern for brick and mortar businesses, which is not uncommon. But specifically, the health and safety concerns were ranging from food safety to crowding and obstruction of access, particularly on our pier, which is very crowded in peak season and on any warm day around the year. Fire risk, it's a wooden old pier, and then occasional turf disputes that have escalated into violence among vendors from time to time. In 2018, SB 946 was the state bill signed into law amid a harsh federal immigration enforcement climate that exposed many low-wage immigrant workers to the risk of deportation. So the bill was intended to protect such workers and expand economic opportunity. And what it did was decriminalize sidewalk vending and place significant limits on cities' abilities to regulate or limit vending, basically to a set of narrow health, safety, and welfare grounds. And it also required cities to put in place permitting programs if they did want to put in place such restrictions. So Santa Monica took on the challenge soon after the passage of the bill, given the prevalence of vending in our community, to create a legally compliant and balanced program that would expand opportunity, but also prioritize public health and safety, as I said, particularly in some of these more congested spaces like the pier and the beachfront area. So in April 2019, our city council did adopt a ordinance that created a sidewalk vending permitting program, and it allowed vending with a permit nearly anywhere in the city, as the state law required. But it did place prohibitions or restrictions on vending on the pier and the immediate surrounding areas of the pier, as well as the beach, the 3rd Street Promenade, and Palisades Park in Santa Monica. So this is the policy and permitting program that I'll delve into in a little bit more detail today. So just to take a step back, I wanted to highlight some of the work that we did before we brought the policy to the council, where we focused on researching policy options and best practices and engaging with key stakeholders. So first, of course, we looked at what other cities had done in the wake of the passage of the state law, looked at their policies and permitting programs to compare and assess what made sense for us in Santa Monica. We had a wide variety of stakeholder meetings, from the LA Street Vendor Campaign advocates that many of you likely are familiar with in your communities. They've been a longstanding group of lawyers and advocates that have represented and worked with street vendors directly in the city of LA. We met with our business groups locally, our Rec and Parks Commission we engaged with, our peer corporation board, and we held a vendor town hall. And that last point really speaks to one of the important insights here, which is for hard to reach stakeholders, it is really important to find people where they are. Most of the existing vendors at the time in Santa Monica were, unpermitted and unfamiliar with engaging with city government. And so what we did was schedule a town hall meeting at the pier itself in the Heal the Bay Aquarium there. We advertised it widely with these little flyers that you see on the screen in English and Spanish, letting people know that the laws and rules were going to be changing, and that if they wanted to learn more or have input, they should join this meeting. We ended up having more than 100 vendors tightly packed into a small auditorium, which feels very foreign these days. But it was a tense meeting. It was a lively meeting, but we had vendors whose own livelihoods, whose own work and safety was at play on this issue, coming and weighing in on our policy development. And then the last piece, throughout, we closely collaborated with our city attorney's office to ensure that we were designing a program that was legally compliant and that would be enforceable once we had it in place. So, in terms of the during, we had to, really stretch beyond our typical practice to ensure that we created an inclusive council meeting, given the nature of the issue and the stakeholders involved. We did, again, promote the council meeting itself among vendors, among other stakeholders, to ensure that the people directly affected would be able to attend. We did ensure that first-time attendees who had never been to City Hall or might have reservations about that, particularly because we were dealing with a largely immigrant workforce, that they were welcomed and oriented as to where to go and how to provide public input. We conducted what was the first ever fully bilingual council hearing in the city of Santa Monica. We had an on-site interpreter to provide live interpretation of public comment, but then we also, in the moment, realized that we wanted to ensure individuals could also understand the staff presentation and the council questions and debate. So we had our interpreter, she fortunately had a couple of dozen headsets on hand, and she distributed those to our Spanish-speaking members of the audience so they could actually get real-time interpretation of the full hearing rather than just their own input and comments being translated, which made for a much richer and more participatory council item. So afterwards, in terms of the outreach and engagement that we did, I think this was really a key focus of our efforts that hopefully will provide some insights to applicants here. One of the things that we wanted to do was ensure that we had an accessible permit program that would reach and ultimately benefit our target audience and be embraced by those that were seeking the kinds of economic opportunities that the policy was really intended to advance. So the first point there is that we designed our policy with low barriers to entry. We kept our fees relatively low. We aligned them with our city food truck permits so that the permit wouldn't be cost prohibitive. And then we also, contrary to some of the other cities that were putting in place vending permitting, we worked with our city's risk manager, and we ultimately decided not to impose a liability insurance requirement. We reserved the right to if conditions warranted, but we recognized that from the outset, if we were requiring this workforce to get liability insurance, that could be immediately cost prohibitive and prevent people from actually seeking a permit in the first place, which would be self-defeating. We held a series of town halls and permitting workshops. We were really determined to make ourselves available to continue to explain the policy, the regulations, the requirements that we put into place, answer sometimes tough questions about why we were restricting vending on the pier or around the pier, which was the most lucrative and active area for unpermitted vending, even after we adopted the policy. And then we also did some smaller format permitting workshops, which were more just a few people at a time to walk applicants through what was for many people a new or unfamiliar or difficult process with a bunch of different steps and requirements. So, we wanted to ensure, again, that people really had a clear sense of the roadmap of what was required to get a permit and to vend lawfully in Santa Monica. And of course, as much as we could, we did all of these events bilingually, either with interpretation services or by taking, by ensuring the participation of bilingual staff or Spanish-speaking staff to be a part of these efforts. So we did, again, our outreach efforts were multifaceted. We did have on the right, you see a QR code cards that we distributed to vendors in the field. We had our enforcement staff, hand out these little cards in English and Spanish with a QR code they could scan with their phones and easily access our permitting information, our application, the requirements, so that they could, again, have easy access to the information that they needed to get permitted. And then we did videos such as the one you see on the screen. I may ask the SCAG staff to play the video briefly, just because I think my audio may not work. But the point there is that we shot these with city staff in both Spanish and in English, again, to clearly walk potential applicants through what was required and attract attention to our permitting program and get the word out more widely. Great, I think we'll take a quick look at this video.
La ciudad de Santa Mónica adoptó una ley de vendedores ambulantes y queremos asegurarnos de que tenga la información que necesita para emprender su negocio y sea exitoso. Si planea vender comida o mercancía en las calles de Santa Mónica, necesitará una licencia de esta ciudad y un permiso de venta ambulante. La manera en cómo aplicar, primero que todo, tiene que escoger un nombre para su negocio. Si va a usar otro nombre que no sea su nombre o el nombre de su compañía, debe que registrar el nombre como.
All right, thanks, folks. We can pause it. I just wanted to give folks a flavor of what that looked like. So let me resume my share here, and I'll wrap up. So yeah, as I said, the videos, this one, as you see in Spanish, we did the same video in English, but again, letting people know that the laws and regulations had changed, letting them know specifically what they would need in order to get a permit, and directing them to those resources and information was really the focus of our efforts along a number of dimensions here. And then the next thing I wanted to highlight was that we worked with a local artist named Rostin Wu, who had designed what was in the sidewalk vending community and in the policy community, a pretty iconic campaign in New York City called Vendor Power. We worked with him on a bilingual fold-out guide that we have used as a key outreach tool. As you see here, this is kind of 2 of the 4 panels, but it really has visual illustrations, FAQs, requirements, and key do's and don'ts about where, how, and when to lawfully and safely vend. You see, again, the QR code, an indication of our vending permit hang tag and decal that we use to identify permitted vendors, and some FAQ here. And again, this is the next couple of panels in this fold-out guide with some very clear visuals, bright colors, easy to understand about where things were permitted or not permitted, what requirements were a part of our program. So, I think the reflection 2 years into this is that we certainly by no means have solved everything. Enforcement was always going to be the biggest challenge of this program, and it remains a huge challenge that we're wrestling with in real time in the city. I was on a meeting on our vending enforcement even earlier this morning. Our need overall is to ensure that the enforcement of the permitting program is well resourced sufficiently to incentivize compliance and encourage people to get a permit. Obviously, if you have a permitting program and are not able to do the necessary enforcement, and there's a very easy and non-penalized route to operating without a permit that really undermines the rationale and obviously is unfair to those who do go through the steps to get a permit. And so we're wrestling with that. The peer area remains a huge challenge in the city. We are still dealing with a lot of unpermitted vending activity over the weekends. Those challenges have actually increased during COVID because many of the other places where vending has been popular historically in LA, from the Hollywood Bowl to Staples Center, the Coliseum are places that are currently closed, and the beach is really, and the pier is where all the action is. And so we have a very high volume of unpermitted activity ongoing. But it just underscores the point that we always need to be monitoring, evaluating, and refining our efforts to improve our program. And we're currently assessing new regulations, new enforcement approaches to enhance the value and viability of our permitting program. So just to close, summarize the lessons that we learned in the city of Santa Monica with our sidewalk vending program. As I indicated earlier with stakeholder engagement, we found it was vital to cast a wide net to do what we could to reach and connect with all of the stakeholders that might be involved in this particular issue, regardless of whether they would be for or against or have particular types of input. In this case, we did need to break some precedent to ensure that there was inclusive input in the decision-making. So, that bilingual council meeting, providing live interpretation, providing headsets. Now we're having done that once a few years ago. We now have repeated that a few other times for similar council items that had a high level of interest from Spanish-speaking members of our community. Meet people where they are, as I said. It wasn't necessarily typical of us to go out onto the pier and bring 100+ vendors together, but it was necessary in the context. Accessibility is key for our program, not just the language, but the fees and ensuring the information was available in a lot of different formats to enable people to know what they needed to get permitted. Getting creative, I think the visual impact of having a really eye-catching and appealing set of outreach materials and website and colors and illustrations, et cetera, helped us, connect, I think, more effectively. And then I think what we're living with in real time here in Santa Monica is the enforcement challenges. You certainly cannot expect to solve everything the first time. And so this is a process of continuous improvement that we're knee deep in, even as we speak here in the city. So that's my reflection and presentation on sidewalk vending in Santa Monica. Happy to take any questions in the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much for that. And thank you to all of our speakers. It was really exciting to hear a little bit of those examples. And I know we're running a little bit behind on time, but we still have about 15 minutes for question and answer. But we did have one question for everyone on the line before we start opening it up for other questions. We just wanted to take a moment to ask one final poll question to ask if there are any barriers to moving forward with the application, because we know that that's sometimes an issue, and we want to make sure we're being as mindful to that as we can be here at SCAG. So I'll turn it over to Avi just to pull up that one last final poll question, and then we will dive right into Q&A. All right, so again, any barriers to moving forward, please select all that apply. And we try to include a lot of different potential barriers there. But if there's any that aren't listed here, feel free to add them to the chat. All right, we'll give it just maybe another 10 seconds or so, and then we'll go ahead and close the chat. All right, let's see here. What do we have? It looks like most of our responses were about a lack of staff time available for completing application, and we certainly understand that. And budget shortfalls due to COVID, we understand that too. Luckily, there's no match required for this call, so we're trying to be as flexible as we can, also anticipating other budget shortfalls for folks as well. And it looks like otherwise, making sure that we have staff to support the projects and that we've got some financial resources were pretty critical too. So thank you for completing that. That's good for us to know, so we can always just try to make sure that these grant opportunities fit, the requirements and everything that we have to go through for these application processes. So thank you, everyone. We will turn it over to our Q&A session now. And we've got some of our speakers still around, so we can definitely open up the floor to any questions. I would like to remind everyone that, you have your raise hand feature that you can use if you're, if you're on the call on your computer, you can raise your hand. You can also hit *9 if you're on the phone, or you can type your questions into the chat box.
Before we go to the raised hands, I'll just answer one of the questions I saw in the chat from Kevin Harbor. So your question about the digital divide and proposals that address closing the gaps in broadband coverage, I would love to see proposals like that. We just need to make sure that they are connecting back to the overall goal of, curb space management and, reducing VMT, reducing GHG, reducing congestion, increasing efficiency, etc., related to the curb. So if you can connect those things, then that would be great to see in an application. And if you want to talk about that further, please schedule one-on-one, during our office hours, and I'll try to join if I can, and if not, one of the other staff would be definitely able to go through that with you. And then there was another one that we saw from Ryan, trying to find it now. There's a lot going on in here about the examples from transit agencies. I don't know of any off the top of my head. I'm new to this program, but one thing I think if your agency owns any curb space, any projects that revolve around that curb space that you own would be really interesting to see. And then if you don't own the curb space, partnering with the municipalities or municipality that you operate in that do own that curb space, as long as they're on board with whatever you want to do and they are in concert with you, then I think that would be great to see. And then Marissa, I think you had something else to say about that one.
Oh yeah, I was just going to add that, I think that the curb space, and especially thinking about like dedicated lanes and things like that, would be really interesting from the transit agency perspective. And I think that other opportunities too could be maybe some inventory around stations. So I definitely think that there's some opportunity. And although this is, the call is almost catered a little bit more to local authorities, that doesn't mean that there's not still some really exciting things that transit agencies could be working on that would be eligible. So I would just, again, recommend if you have any questions, if you're trying to figure out a good idea, please schedule something with our coaching sessions. We've got those one-on-one coaching sessions available. And I think that, just in general, if anybody's got an idea and you're wondering if something is eligible, that's a great example to kind of sit down and talk about it with us and really make sure that, whatever you're envisioning is something that we're also envisioning too, and that they're a good fit. So if maybe somebody from SCAG staff could just paste that Calendly link just so everybody can sign up for our coaching session. They go from now until April 16th. Let's see what else we have in the chat. So I see we've got a couple other questions coming up. First, I see we're asking what are the range of award amounts that are anticipated. And I can't say that we, for this call, we did it a little differently. We don't have a maximum or a minimum funding amount per project type. I know that's typically something we do. For this call, we're doing it a little differently though. We don't have those. What we can say is we've got 2.5 million available across the 4 project types. And ideally, we'd like to fund a couple of projects in each, maybe 2 to 4 or 5, but it would really kind of depend on the types of applications that we receive. And, some project types might be more popular than others. So just generally speaking, we've got 2.5 million available across all 4 of the project types. Oh, and I see another question. How do we schedule the coaching sessions? We've got the link there. So you just follow that link and everything should be really easy. If for some reason those coaching sessions don't offer any availability that lines up with you in the next couple of weeks, please just reach out to me or anybody else on the team. We'd be happy to set one up if, for some reason you can't find something in the coaching session link that actually aligns with your availability. Just let us know. We'll make sure that we can get you, get something scheduled for you. And I see another question about, these examples are largely pertaining to high density areas. The issues of curb space are different in suburban environments. When we think about planning for increasing residential densities, what suggestions do we have for places that don't currently have congestion or conflicts within curb spaces, but are planning for increasing density and intensity of uses in the transportation systems that support that? That is an excellent question. I'd like to, just off the top of my head, think that maybe using some of the SCAG data sets that we have for like local profiles and things like that. I know that we do a lot of work, trying to forecast out population density and things like that. And I wonder if there's some overlapping opportunities to kind of use some of those SCAG data sets to help us predict, more intense curb uses in the future. Do any of my colleagues on the line have any thoughts about that? Any other helpful tips or anything? Maybe Scott, do you have any thoughts on, planning for future curb space as opposed to planning for, curb space kind of right now with our existing conditions?
Yeah, thanks, Marissa. I think, like Marissa said, I mean, we've developed kind of a toolbox from last mile freight strategy. So I think that's a resource that's available that, anyone in here can feel free to take a look at. We can make sure we get that link out from our website. So that's, I think, to speaking to what Marissa was talking about, maybe there's something to garner some more thoughts about, approaches. Directly to different place types that may not be focusing on as dense areas. I think, maybe talking a little bit to what Tom said, I mean, as long as there can be a relationship made to, some sort of issue, some sort of challenge that relates to, operations of things that are affecting, curb delivery. I mean, it doesn't have, I mean, if there's kind of more of a connection between like something occurring in a residential area coming from a different place, I mean, I just think that, whatever the issues are or the challenges are, I mean, it's just, just try to make that as clear as possible, in an application. So I don't think that we're trying to suggest that the only primary opportunity is just like a dense area of activity, but at the same time, I think, we need to understand there has to be some sort of a, point where activity is taking place. So maybe there's like an area that's more industrialized, as an example for commercial, where a lot of things are being generated to go to another area. So maybe there's like, where things are beginning that have to go to a last mile area versus where things are coming from getting to a last mile area. So I think that's maybe kind of a clear example on the commercial side. I don't know if I have any other specificity to non-commercial, but that's, trying to think a little bit of like the whole piece of how, maybe something starts somewhere and then ends somewhere else. At least on the commercial side, I think that there's some, some different land use, different area type examples of, how those things are occurring, and definitely relationships to congestion and routes and how things are getting from one place to another to get to that last mile from an originating area as well. So I don't know if anyone else has any other ideas aside from like kind of more the freight side, but that's kind of how I would try to get at that question.
All right, well, we did see another question here in the chat too about project cost. If we could get an idea of approximate cost of the projects to help agencies really understand, kind of the ballpark range for some of these costs for some of these types of projects. I don't know that SCAG has any of the financial details, but maybe some of our guest speakers from Santa Monica or Lacey have, kind of a ballpark number off the top of their head. For a lot of the project examples that we had shown earlier, some of them weren't even in the SCAG region, so I don't know that we have the funding details, although I understand that would be very useful. So maybe it's something we can try and and track down and share with you. But as far as our speakers, do they, or anybody from SCAG, does anybody have any thoughts on kind of ballparking some of these project costs?
This is Kelly from curb project. We've allotted between 40 and 50,000 for the 20 or so curb space for a year.
Could you repeat that one more time? Yeah, you cut out a little bit towards the end.
Sorry, 40 to 50,000 a year for 20 curb spaces is what we've been looking at.
Great, thank you.
And with regards to the vending program in Santa Monica, most of it, it wasn't a physical infrastructure or CIP program of any sort. It was mostly staff time for policy development and then enforcement. But we did have about, I believe, a $20,000 or $25,000 outreach and engagement budget, which funded, for example, a small portion of that campaign that you saw with the flyers and the QR codes, et cetera. So that was a key piece of it. And I see that ties to, I know there's a question in the comments about community engagement. That was certainly a vital portion of our project.
Great, thank you. Anything on project costs from the SCAG side? Do we have any details on any of those project examples, or maybe that's something we can, like I said, try and track down and share? All right, hearing nothing, I'm going to assume that we probably don't have a lot of detail there, but keep those questions coming. I'm just going to put my contact information on the screen since we're just about out of time. But if you have any other questions, please feel free to email me and follow up afterwards, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with one of our SCAG staff members. Do we have anything else in the chat right now? Okay. Kayla, I'm going to take your name and I'm going to try to follow up with you afterwards. I'll see if I can track down any more information for you. Otherwise, if there's any other questions, again, please feel free to reach out to me. I thank everyone for their participation today, all of our speakers. I'm really grateful to have everyone on the line helping us, get this call up and running. As you have other questions, please reach out to me. Please feel free to schedule another one of those coaching sessions if you haven't already. And we will have another webinar in April. So, other opportunities to ask us questions then as well. And since we're about at 3 o'clock, I think that's it for us. So please reach out if you think of anything else. And thank you everyone for participating, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.